Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm extremely grateful to hear and watch the elders, scholars, artists, performers, educators, teachers, and to be myself part of this year's online festival, especially in this very difficult, confusing, and challenging times. I would like to thank Floyd, his family, his friends, collaborators, supporters, and funders for making this festival possible to take place online this year. As a performer and as a researcher, I've always worked across disciplines, methods, techniques, languages, and forms of expression. And working with Floyd has provided a multidimensional platform and experience, which I am honored to have had gone through the last 2 years on the Poundmaker Reserve of the Cree Nation and the Miyawata culture's beautiful camp, the site and the stage by the Poundmaker Lake. This year, Floyd asked me about the possibility of adapting Master of the Dew written by Floyd. So I'm sharing the first act as a work in progress performance during this festival. And now I would like to share some of my thoughts and the process of developing this work, which ultimately took a shape of a meeting of Odissi dance and Plains Indian Sign Language in Floyd's theatre methods. So it all began with these 2 words, Mudras and Waskawewin. In one of his essays, Floyd explains Waskawewin as a Cree word meaning movement. And he discusses about the relationship, this connection between life and movement that is a very fundamental Cree insight. And also, it is a central aspect in his perception of theatre and life. Mudras are hand gestures. They are a codified form of action signs used in classical dance, classical Indian dance, and theatre to tell stories. And also they are used in yoga for therapeutical and healing purposes. Last year, I got another perspective to these action signs when I was introduced to the Plains Indian Sign Language at Dr. Lanny Realbird's workshop. That inspired me to explore the possibilities of bringing the sign language to performance. And we partly explored that during the work on the adaptation of Uncle Vanya last year. So, hand gestures and sign language, I see them as pictures and stories in movement. So with these 2 ideas, I started my exploration of Master of the Dew. I decided to approach the Plains Indian Sign Language as, well, in the way I would apply dance gestures to tell stories. And I wanted to use a movement, a form, that is based on Odissi dance. I want to make it clear what I perform is not Odissi dance, but I draw from the technique and the theory of Odissi dance. The other 2 essential elements are the spoken narration, which is happening in English and Bengali instead of English, French, and Cree, and the original music, composed and mixed by Rohit Sengupta. He is a professional sound designer based in Kolkata who works in the Indian film industry. He has worked with not only feature films and web series, but also indie projects, short films, and documentaries. But most importantly, he has a passion for music and singing. He loves to compose and experiment with national and international music. and also happens to be my cousin brother. Once again, it has been a great pleasure to collaborate with him. Using these different mediums, ultimately what I arrived at is a storytelling performance where different practices meet at the crossroads. But before I move into the meeting, let me first introduce the origins of these practices. Plains Indian Sign Language was in use as an intertribal lingua franca among Plains people, and also, as Brenda Farnell in her study of the Assiniboine communities identifies, the storytellers and performers, when singing, they would use this action sign system as gestures to add meanings and dynamics to their tales. For them, she points, it is part of their speech talk that is, I quote, at once vocal and manual. Both vocal gestures and manual gestures create utterances that are considered to be talking, unquote. And for this reason, she refers to it as PST, Plains Sign Talk. According to Farnell's research, the establishment of reserves, the displacement, isolation, and also the forced use of English language led to its gradual decline. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, army officers, missionaries, and some amateurs have compiled books on sign language. Some of them were even written for Boy Scouts. Today, there are some fluent sign talkers on plain reserves, and Farnell mentions those on the Northern Plains at Fort Belknap, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, and Blackfeet reservations in Montana, and at the Blood Reserve in Canada. We also know of Dr. Lanny Reilbert, who has been involved in an extensive research, dissemination, and teaching of Plains Indian Sign Language. In addition to this, during my stay in Poundmaker, in the context of ceremonies, but also in their everyday interaction when Floyd or Kelly spoke in Cree, communicated in Cree, they accompanied their speech with some hand gestures which resembled the sign language. Exploring sign language on YouTube, I also came across this contemporary performance genre in which the Lord's Prayer, hymns and songs are performed by some mostly young women with the use of sign language. And from what I understand, the sign language is also being used recently to assist the learning of indigenous languages. Now, moving to the next form, which is Odissi dance. It originates from the eastern state of India, Orissa, located over the Bay of Bengal, and is today known as one of the 8 classical dance styles of India. Odissi is now performed all around the world by both women and men on proscenium stage. It was reconstructed and declared as a classical form in the 1960s, which makes it one of the youngest classical dance forms. But the archaeological evidences in Orissa that date back to the 2nd century BCE make it the most ancient dance form of India. These carvings and inscriptions in the caves of Udaygiri suggest a form of entertainment for the kings or gods, perhaps. And if we look back to the more recent history, we see a ritual, a performance by female devotees of the Lord Jagannath. Jagannath is the incarnation of God Vishnu, who is one of the 3 main gods in Hinduism. So in the temple of Puri, the Jagannath temple, this practice took place. From anthropologist Frederick Apfel Margolian's research, we learned that it was a psychosomatic performance. A prayer in which the female performer would surrender her entire self to the god king Jagannath, whom she was believed to have been married to. People saw her as someone auspicious. She was well respected and held a distinct and high social status. But when the British colonists, with their preconceived Victorian ideals of female chastity, saw these sensual and free-spirited Maharis, they could not grasp this performance. The ritual and the practice was beyond their comprehension, which ultimately led to the ban placed on these temple dance practices and its decline. The way Odissi dance is performed today has been shaped by multiple traditions and practices from Oriya region and India. It was reconstructed on the basis of the movements frozen in the temple sculptures and the palm leaf manuscripts. It was also based on the ancient scriptures on dance and music, the acrobatic gotipuas, those little boys' enactment of the feminine form of loving devotion to Krishna, the religious love poem of Gita Govinda, Orissa's theatres, the folk and tribal culture, and it has been influenced by several religious beliefs, regional traditions, and everyday movements and actions. During the reconstruction, the dance was also codified and structured in connection with the performative theories and practices from the Natya Shastra. Natya Shastra is an ancient treatise on Indian dramaturgy, believed to have been compiled by the sage Bharata around 5th century BCE. So we can say that the origins of both these practices are closely bound to tradition, rituals, and ceremonies, and both have been disrupted by a colonial force. Now, these two practices meet in a storytelling performance of Master of the Dew. Storytelling, the tradition of oral storytelling, is absolutely central to the indigenous cultures of the Turtle Island. They teach about cultural beliefs and values, practices, rituals, history, relationship, and the way of life. It is based on the holistic and experiential learning and relationship building. But storytelling is present in, I would risk saying, all cultures and nations. But it appears in several different forms across the world. Still, there is an universal need and value behind stories and storytelling. As we can hear in this documentary on storytelling traditions of India. Let's watch a short section from it.
When I hear somebody saying, once upon a time, I wish to tell you a story. It happened like this.
The pleasure of sitting down with a group of people in front of a fire or in front of a feast and telling epic.
It's our urge to make sense of our existence and our lives.
Stories are very important for cultures.
People want story.
We're fundamentally narrative creatures.
I think that we are formed by stories.
Stories to engage us, entertain us, stimulate our imagination.
Stories are a way of looking at life.
Provides sense, provides consolation, it provides continuity.
It reifies life as lived. It tries to reconcile us to life as lived. It tries to point out the wonder of life as lived. And it makes us look beyond ourselves.
India has always had, stories being told, or rather retold in different ways, mainly through performances. And if you look at our music or dance, in fact, many of them do have either direct narrations of stories or at least suggestions of stories or certain contexts in our epics. So I think our whole tradition of art and literature is linked to the telling of stories and the ways the stories are told.
Following this understanding, Odissi itself could be seen as a form of storytelling, where instead of the performer's narration, there is a singer who sings the stories from the mythology or the poetry, the Oriya poetry, and the performer moves and acts through her entire body-mind. I took Floyd's suggestion and did the narration along with the movements, connecting it at the same time to the tradition of the temple dancers, who sang and narrated stories along with dancing, and also to folk storytellers across India. So I use narration and sing along with the movements, which doesn't happen in Odissi dance today, and this was a challenge for me, and it is an area I have to still unpack. In terms of the language, the Cree sections were translated to Bengali, which brought a significant change. For example, the Cree word mosam. When I started saying the same idea but uttering the more familiar to me Bengali word dadu, which is grandfather, it became more meaningful to me. Immediately triggered personal images, emotions that are linked with that word and its sound. But the storytelling happens not only through the words, but through the movement of the entire body-mind of the performer. So here I draw from the Odissi dance theories and techniques of the Rasa Bhava and Abhinaya. Rasa Bhava is an aesthetic theory based on a body-mind philosophy mentioned in the Natya Shastra. The word bhava can be translated as mood, feeling or emotion, and rasa as essence or taste, and in fact many more. And neither of these words can be translated into just a single word, so I'll come back to it later. In general, Odissi dance combines both non-narrative, pure dances as well as the narrative dances called Abhinaya. This performance is based on the format of the narrative dances, so the Abhinayas. The word Abhinaya is fundamentally used to denote the performance method, technique of expression. The Sanskrit word consists of two segments. The prefix abhi means two words, and the root ni from naya is to lead. Thus, the word implies to lead towards the rasa, the ultimate bliss, the highest aesthetic experience. It is a completely movement-based concept. Practically, what happens is the dancer, through hand gestures, facial expressions, and full body movements, the Angika Abhinaya, alongside the music and lyrics of the song, Vachika Abhinaya, the costume and jewelry, Aharya Abhinaya, and involuntary psychophysical expressions or emotional feelings and reactions such as crying, trembling, the Satvik Abhinaya, the performer through all of these enacts stories and expresses emotions. Hence, from the dancer's perspective, in this expressive and dynamic performance, a dancer internalizes certain bhavas within herself and performs it with her entire body-mind to touch the audience and evoke in the audience as well as in themselves rasa. Bhava thus is not just an emotion or feeling, but as the performance studies scholar Philip Zarelli defined it, it is an optimal state of being, doing in the process of making or becoming a character. So the characters or the environment are created at the very moment of dancing. While the dancer's body-mind forms the relationships, gets in contact with the imaginary environment or the characters, the bhava is simultaneously established through the performer's kinesthetic, tactile actions and thinking. We have the presence of both the physical and the mental, somatic and cognitive, are interconnected. As I mentioned earlier, the ultimate aim of Odissi dance is reaching Rasa. To use Eugenio Barber's term, this is an extra daily state or experience. Sanskrit scholars have defined it also as a superworldly delight or a blissful state of mind comparable to the enjoyment of Brahman, which is the primordial energy or the creator. Others explain it as moksha, the state of becoming one with the creator. So the way the Rasa Bhava theory binds the performer and the audience, the way it moves from the individual and blends into an universal experience, from the personal to the shared communal feelings. I see here a place where the Odissi dance meets Floyd's theatrical method, the aspect of how the community and family shares the experience together by supporting, respecting, and learning from each other. And there is another side of it, the experience of Rasa as the highest aesthetic experience, becoming one with the primordial energy, the creator. This could be linked with the result, the outcome of Floyd's theatre method, the theatre doubled, which Floyd takes from Artaud's idea of the theatre and its double. The double being seen as the unconscious, which for Floyd is the spirit world, the spiritual. So we see in the process and in the performance, there is a spiritual experience that may ideally lead to or result in a healing. The style of the body movement is driven from Odissi body stances. The sama, the straight, the abhanga, where there is a slight shift of the weight towards one side of the body and the shift to one of the legs. Slight shift, because in this third one, the tribhangi, we have a greater shift of the weight, and we see three bends, at least three bends in the body. So there is the neck, the torso and the knee, but if you look closely you will find many more bends in this posture. And the last one, choka, which is a square position, square stance. I also look at the sitting positions inside a teepee of men and women. These are the positions that we also explored last year for the adaptation of Uncle Vanya. And in this performance, I used them primarily for Rose Billy and the Old Beaver. In terms of the transitions to transform the characters, so the turns and changes of space, these are also done following the Odissi practice. Moving to hand gestures, I see them as action signs, a term coined by Drid Williams, and Farnell explains it as a human signifying act that utilizes the medium of body movement. Action signs are meaningful units of movements culturally and semantically laden. I see the use of hand gestures in storytelling performances in line with Farnell. She defines it not as multimedia events in which two languages go on at the same time, but as cross-media events where action signs and speech integrate, so each having an essential part of the whole performance. This is also how I approach the use of Plains Indian Sign Language in my performance, and I do so because of the performative theory behind the use of mudras in Odissi dance. I quote the dance guru Sharmila Biswas, who says that hasta mudras are extensions of our feelings, so we need to connect with it. It must be an honest expression, otherwise no one will understand it. I have used a combination of sign language and hasta mudras. Some signs I have familiarized with, some I still have to connect with. And there were others which I was unable to find in sign language, So for now, I have used the dance mudras, which I am able to connect with. Interestingly, there are some mudras similar in sign language and Odissi dance. For example, come. In dance, in Odissi dance, I could say come, and in sign language, one would show it this way, come, or come, come. Open the door. So in dance, I would open it this way and close, and in sign language, open the door. A slight difference. And tell in dance, in Odissi dance, and tell in sign language, tell, say, speak. The signs I have used are mostly the ones I learned at Dr. Lanny Realbird's workshop or from his online videos. I also used some from William Tompkins and Brenda Furnell's research. And I have to apologize for my mistakes, if any happened. I'm still learning to bring more clarity and precision to the sign language. Obviously, bringing greater clarity and connection between the hand gestures, movements, and the emotional and somatic feeling would help develop the depths of emotions and expression of each character. In terms of the space I felt the performance should happen in a natural setting, and I wanted to move within a shape of a half circle, as you can see here in the sketch from my notes, with a piece of cloth and some props, ribbons, tea, tobacco or other things at the center, where the two characters, Rose Billy and Old Beaver, are also located, with the narrator and the mother on one side, and the young beaver and woman on the other side. This shape, this positioning is in connection with the sense of circularity that is inscribed in the written work and the story, through the concepts of time, relationship between the characters. Now, a few points about the music. The main inspiration for the music was the folk styles from the northeastern India, the hilly areas of Assam, Manipur and Meghalaya, and specifically the indigenous people of this land, the Khasis, and their culture. Here is a short example of their music. As Rohit explained to me, the Khasis use their music for ancestor worship and to pay tribute to the living soul within all the animate as well as inanimate objects in the world. He felt it was an intersection point of the two cultures. The music was also composed with the view of a live performance following the tradition of storytelling practices in India. Rohit says the choice of instruments has been elemental and character-driven. Essentially, instruments like bamboo flutes, duitara, a plucked two-string indigenous instrument from northeastern India, a simple fiddle-like bowing instrument, can be violin, and various indigenous forms of drums and percussions like the Tibetan bowl and coconut shell rattles can be used for a live performance of the same piece. The music was seminal to the storytelling performance. It developed the pace for each character and established relations between them. As Rohit explains, the music is centered on the individual characters as opposed to linear narrative-based composition style. This is partially due to the multi-layered narration structure of the work and also to create an idea of the shift in time and space for the same character. For instance, the old beaver is characterized by a melody structure which is similar to that of the young beaver, but the change is conveyed through the higher and shorter fleeting notes for young beaver and lower legato style notes with a minor scale for the old beaver. The shift from major to minor scale as the narration shifts from young beaver to the old gives the idea of the change in time and emotion. Yet, the similarity in melody structure makes one feel that the character is still the same. What Rohit was mostly fascinated by was the multi-layered narration structure. And we both had the image of the Russian babushka doll, opening and revealing the characters, the narrators, one after the other, and closing the narration. So Rohit incorporated this metaphor musically through the use of motifs for individual characters, and also, as he explains, at the closing of the first act, when Mother talks about the Great Spirit delicately opening the hand of the muskrat, the motif used for the young beaver seeing the woman for the first time is heard, as both events mark the beginning of it all. Similarly, this is followed by the piece that plays when the Great Spirit blows upon the earth and creates the land. This is the same motif that you hear when the old beaver talks about his own land and where everything occurred to Rosebilly. Ultimately, the first act closes with the young beaver telling the woman that this is where you will live as well. And you hear the same piece that opened the first act when Mother was talking about a land where the wind was rushing through the grass, thus connecting those two spaces at the same time, completing a circular structure as a whole. Thus, the circularity and relations are built through this music. The ultimate result is the formation of the bridge. Here we have an interdisciplinary performance, storytelling, dance, music, songs, sign language, all come together. And it is an intercultural expression through universal gestures, feelings, stories, approaches. They all together build a bridge of connection between these two cultures. Floyd has developed a contemporary theatre method or process for Indigenous theatre based on Cree ritual, social structure, and epistemology, which he refers to as the Native Performance Culture or NPC. He expresses this through this equation. In this equation, we have a multiplication of tradition and process, which is multiplied by healing and altogether influenced by family and community. As a result, there is the theatre doubled. The Cree relational epistemology discussed by Margaret Kovacs can be paralleled with Favel's inclusion of community and healing in his theatrical methodology. While personally working with Floyd on Poundmaker, and through unwrapping and trying to embody his written work this year, I have felt a deep presence of the 4 ethical principles that many Indigenous scholars and elders have mentioned: relationship, respect, reciprocity, and responsibility. Through his education, research, performance, and travels, Floyd has established a transcultural and transnational platform of creative action and exchange that is inclusive and that bridges Indigenous cultures of the world. The base is that all theory, knowledge, and method is derived from the Turtle Island. And from there, bridges are formed with the world. So in this performance, the bridge connects. Plains Indian Sign Language with Mudras, storytelling with Odissi dance, and the concept of circularity that is in the written work and in the story, with the circularity in the space and movement and in the music. And the theatre doubled as the spiritual experience encompassing community, family and healing meets Rasa, this extra daily state and highest aesthetic experience, binding the individuals into an universal, beyond human experience. In relation to movement, Waskawewin, Floyd writes, "If you were to ask a Cree person, what is life? They may very well answer you with this statement: life is movement." We believe that all life on earth is in constant movement. The sun, the earth, the moon, the wind, the earth, ourselves, our bloods, our heart. One of our words for death is cessation of movement. This is how much the idea of movement informs our perceptions of life. Now, when I first read this essay, it reminded me of the very well known in India metaphor of dance as life. It is in the figure of Nataraja, who is one of the forms of Hindu god Shiva, where we see him as the Lord of Dance, who destroys the weary universe and creates the new through his cosmic dance. In similarity to these thoughts, Farnell, in her study of sign language, says, in the Assiniboine philosophy of being in the world, makes body movement foundational. Social and personal action appear to be centered in a form of meaningful social life in which body movement is intrinsic as a way of knowing. So, the approach I take in performing the sign language in movement embodies these ideas and goes beyond the Western dualistic body and mind separation. Here, the mind and reason is not removed from body and movement. They are all integrated and interconnected. Both Plains Indian Sign Language and Odissi dance have their origins in tradition. They have both been part of rituals and ceremonies, and they have both survived and come out of colonial suppression. There is this thread that binds them together. It is this traditional practice present all over the world. Storytelling. So, in the storytelling performance of Master of the Dew, the traditions from different cultures flow together intangibly as the process evolves. I see a possibility of building this bridge further, this bridge connecting cultures, and I would love to receive your comments and suggestions once you watch the work in progress. Overall, it has been a unique experience, especially being locked down in our homes with restricted mobility and social interactions. So, to be able to connect online across continents from North America to Europe to Asia and work together in this project has itself been extremely uplifting. And this made me think of these invisible threads that connect us, no matter where and when we are. It's just that in our normal days, normal ways, being constantly in rush, we just don't see them. We don't pay attention, so we don't see them. But they reveal themselves at times like these. I wish we all keep moving forward with positive thoughts and actions. Thank you.